Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Clemson versus Georgia. And if you want an idea of the difference in these two programs at this point. Remember, 3 years ago, the 2021 season, Clemson and Georgia played the opening weekend. Clemson was a 1.5-point favorite. Georgia ended up winning 13-3. That was the first of their two national championship runs. But I bring it up because Clemson 3 years ago, 36 months ago, was a 1.5-point favorite. Clemson is now a 13.5-point underdog. Georgia, obviously, that would make them a 13.5-point favorite in this game. 48.5. Again, we're recording on Tuesday. The over-under win total set at 48.5. We will see if that changes over the course of this week. In terms of this game, listen, with Georgia, I don't know that I need to share all that much. We all remember what happened last year. Blitz through the regular season, lose to Bama in that SEC championship game. And as I've said 1,000 times this offseason, you ask the bookmakers across college football, they'll tell you that if Georgia had made the playoff, they would have been favored against every team, even Michigan, and even a rematch with Bama. So the Vegas said they were the best team in college football last year. It doesn't matter. Michigan's a deserving champion. If you're a Michigan fan, I'm not crapping on your team. They were my preseason pick to win it, by the way. So why would I care? But at the same time, Georgia was awesome. Georgia now has a chip on their shoulder. But what I think is also interesting about Georgia is this. I think because Georgia has historically been so good on defense, I think it's kind of interesting to note that offensively they were awesome last year. Like, the defense was fine. Defense was top 20 nationally. They had the number 2 offense in the SEC, top 5 nationally. The only offense that was better was Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas at LSU. But Georgia, Carson Beck threw for 3,900 yards. I don't think people realize how awesome that guy was a year ago. And so he's got plenty of talent around him. Now, it'll be interesting. Trevor Etienne, who transferred from Florida, be very interesting. He got a DUI over the course of the offseason. Now, it was pled down in court, but he was one of several Georgia players to get arrested. Kirby Smart would not discuss the status of his game. Based on Kirby Smart's history, you'd assume that he's going to play at some point. He's at running back. Wide receiver room is stacked. You know, I've heard a lot of Brock Bowers. Can you replace him? I don't know if anybody replaces the best tight end, one of the best tight ends we've ever seen in college football. Oscar Delp's pretty good, though. They got plenty of depth at that position. They added a transfer from Stanford as well. And the defense, listen, Kirby's going to tell you all this stuff about this is the least depth we've ever had. We don't have the elite pass rushers that we've had in the past. Those are first world problems, okay? Because Georgia's got as much talent as anybody probably in college football, you know, on that defensive side of the football. You look at all 3 levels. Mykel Williams on the defensive line. Smile Munden at linebacker, another player, by the way, who got arrested in the offseason. Don't expect him to not play in this game. Secondary obviously did lose a lot with Bullard and some of the other guys that they lost over the course of the last season. But it doesn't change the fact Malachi Starks is back. You had a couple nice pieces. Is this where maybe KJ Bolden, the true freshman, gets some reps? But the point I'm trying to make, talent across the board. From the Clemson perspective, listen, there's a time and a place to criticize Clemson. This isn't like, I'm not going to do the big, like, DABO doesn't use the portal. What's going on? By the way, saw on Monday that DABO is no longer taking phone calls for his coach's show. So I just bring it up because, look, there's a time, there's a place to talk DABO, his decision-making. It ain't this week, even though I do think it can impact this game. From the Clemson perspective, listen, to me, the most interesting story, not only in this game, but I would argue one of the more interesting stories in all of college football is what becomes of the Cade Klubnik-Garrett Riley relationship. Remember, Cade Klubnik was as highly rated as anybody coming out of high school in that 2022 class. Comes to Clemson. Basically, he doesn't redshirt as a freshman because he played in a bunch of games, but they basically forced DJU out, put him in the ACC championship game. He rolls. We all assume it's going to be like explosive last year when they bring in Garrett Riley, Lincoln Riley's brother, who, of course, was the offensive coordinator at TCU 2 years ago. Doesn't really happen that way, though. Cade Klubnik ends up completing 64% of his passes, 19 TDs, 9 interceptions. Now, in his defense, it is worth noting, the O-line has not been very good over the last couple years and certainly wasn't good enough last year. I think what's also worth noting is that the wide receiver room hasn't been its vintage self. Now, they did add a couple 5-stars this year. Bryant Wesco from Texas was one of them. The other one outside of Bryant Wesco was TJ Moore, a 5-star from Florida. So they have talent in that room. It is young talent. And to Clemson's credit, that front line of the defense is elite with Peter Woods, with all sorts of talent. Obviously, Barrett Carter making kind of a surprising decision to return. TJ Parker was a first-team freshman All-American a year ago. Now, in terms of this game, I'll be honest. Listen, I'm not as down on Clemson as most people. Not as down on them as most people. Okay, let me get that out of the way. I do have them in the playoff as the second representative from the ACC, behind only Miami. But at the same time, I don't love this matchup, and I do think this is a matchup where Clemson could be in trouble for a very specific reason. The portal stuff. I'm not going to crush Dabo. This isn't, again, I'm not going to do it. But at the same time, this is where I think the portal stuff matters. Because Dabo's big thing about the portal is, we're not going to recruit over the guys that we have, and that's not how we do things. Okay, I respect that. I get it. Whatever. And the issue is not your front 22. Nobody's debating the talent on your defense. Nobody's debating the young talent at wide receiver that you have on offense. The issue is that over the course of a game against an elite team and over the course of a season, are you going to have the depth that you need to compete at the highest levels? Okay. That's not my opinion. It's an indisputable fact. When even if you're only losing 8, 10 guys, 12 guys to the portal every offseason, first of all, that's not even huge attrition. I think Georgia lost like 23. But even if you're losing 8, 10, 12 guys, and now you're replacing them with only freshmen, with only guys that are 18 years old, it means you don't have a lot of depth. You don't have competitive depth. And the guys that you're putting in are super young. And so nobody's worried about that front line. Nobody's worried about it. I worry about, 1, week 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 2, against a team like Georgia that can keep rotating bodies against you. And so I look at this game. I do have a best bet. I think it's Georgia minus 13.5. Now, look, I think this is a game. I could see it being 7-6 at the half. I could see it being 13-10 Clemson at the half. But what I worry about is over the course of 40 minutes, do you have those dudes against a team like might not matter against Wake Forest, might not matter against Pitt, might not matter against NC State, but against Georgia? Yeah, I believe that it will matter. And I believe that Georgia's going to be able to ground and pound late, run over. I don't want to say run over because the Clemson defensive front is nasty. But you just run out of bodies. You just run out of depth. There's just only so many hits your guys can take, again, especially against a team as good as Georgia. So give me Georgia to win. I'll say 31-14. I think Georgia wins. I think Georgia covers. And I think come Monday, we're asking the same questions about Dabo that we have really for the last 2 or 3 years.